This episode was created with the support of Free FM, Hamilton, New Zealand's community access media organisation. Visit us at freefm.org.nz.
Hello and welcome to another episode of ReThinking Mental Wellbeing. This is our community podcast where we can talk about everything related to depression and anxiety. So my name is Andre and I want to thank you for being with me over the next half an hour as we share the space of lived experience where we can talk about how to live the best version of our authentic life. So, if you're ready, then I'm ready. Welcome to the podcast. Welcome back to Rethinking Mental Wellbeing. If you are here for the first time, then welcome to the space. If you've been here before, then welcome back to the space. In today's episode, we're going to talk about a topic that for many of us find really difficult to put into practice. But when we do, it becomes an integral and critical part in our own well-being. There are certain types of people in this world, ones that feel alive in moments of solitude, in moments of stillness. Certain types of people that are full of depth and full of wisdom, moving through their day with intentional purpose. Ones whose energy in the world around them is soft and gentle and quiet. Who speaks with meaning and purpose, who finds their own rhythm in life that is slow and almost sacred, ones who seek to live through the language of authenticity, by the values that they express into the world around them, not by what they say, but by what they do. Ones who place more meaning in the silence and in the calm of their inner world than the busyness, attention-focused, always hungry of the outside world, as they often struggle as the world around them creates their version of our identity. But this sacred space within us, where our authenticity lives, needs to be protected. It needs to be cultivated, looked after, and respected. And we need to learn how to protect the sacred space that we hold within us, furiously but gently. And the world has given a name for those types of people. We are known as introverts, and we find ourselves living in two worlds, the outside world and all of the demands, all of the expectations, all of the opinions, and all of the overwhelm, and the inner world where we prefer to live, from the inside out, as we live our inner world projected outward, placing the emphasis on knowing and understanding ourselves, as opposed to creating our sense of self-worth based on the billions of different interpretations of what that looks like or should look like for us. But for a lot of us, particularly in our early years, we have spent our time with a focus that our happiness and our quality of life is largely dependent on how the outside world interprets us, how the outside world values us, how the outside world tells us what we are worth. So learning to live authentically is where we often have to do a complete 180 as we understand and come to the realization that we have to learn to live from the inside out, that we have to start prioritizing life around things like our values and around our boundaries. And this takes a little bit of time to adjust to, because maybe we have been taught that to put ourselves first is somehow selfish, that somehow it is wrong. Therefore, always having to put other people before us, but wondering why that never works out for us. And this adjustment and this reorientation often is pivoted around our sense of self-worth, as we continue to seek the approval, the validation, and the acceptance from others around us to supply us with their version of what they think we are worth. And this outward focus deprioritizes our own focus as we distract ourselves, desensitize ourselves, even numbing ourselves to our own needs that aren't being met. And that space between where we are and our authenticity is what we call suffering. And in the meantime, your authentic self is continually telling you to look inward, to not forget about yourself, to be compassionate to yourself, to learn to be kinder to yourself. Boundaries is our language of respect, and it has nothing to do with our perception or our perceived sense of self-worth. Living to our values and the boundaries that we wrap carefully around those values is not dependent on what we believe we are worth. It is almost a biological necessity. So our boundaries become a declaration that we have values, that we're not only expressing into the world around us, but we are protecting and cultivating because they are valuable. Because to live well, to live whole, and to live authentically is not to become louder, but it's to become truer. And living our truth often starts with living to our values. And we look after our values with the boundaries that we put in place as we change our mantra from "I am here to perform for you" to "I am here to live for me." So boundaries are our steady, gentle guidelines towards authenticity. Our boundaries take the shape and wrap around our values. This is critically important to know because it changes the interpretation of what we think boundaries are. It has less to do with other people, and it has more to do with cultivating, looking after, developing and growing our own values, which is the language of our authentic nature. Our authentic boundaries are unique and personal to us. Boundaries are birthed from your inner knowing and from your authentic nature. That quiet space deep within that speaks of your truth long before the world began to influence your thoughts. Your boundaries are the living, breathing expression of your values, of your needs, and of who you are. Your boundaries are not rigid. They flow with your spirit. They respond to your needs. They give structure to your environment. They adapt to your own energy levels in response to our environment around us. Authentic boundaries do not remain fixed in place. They are dynamic, and they evolve as we do. Just as we are changing, so do our needs. For example, in this moment, you may be craving deep connection, but in the next moment, solitude may be the thing that you crave. So boundaries is not just about saying no to others. It's more about saying yes to yourself. And in this journey of setting boundaries, we have been taught to view our sensitivity as something to hide or even to apologize for, as if it's some sort of flaw. But what if sensitivity is not a flaw or a weakness? What if instead it is a finely tuned, heightened insight that shows us how to navigate towards our authentic self? So when we live a values-driven life, which is a life where our authentic nature is able to be expressed by the instruction manual of our values, then it makes sense in order to look after your values, to respect them and to honor them, we need boundaries to do that. And for some of you that are listening, this may make total sense to you, because maybe you've been trying to live by putting a whole lot of boundaries in place as a way to protect yourself and wondering why it's not quite working. For a lot of us, we end up not putting boundaries in place, but instead they become walls and barriers that we put in place, trying to keep people out, to keep people away from our vulnerability. But boundaries don't do that. Boundaries is your respect that you wrap around your values. Boundaries are about honoring your limits, quietly shaping the way that we move through the world with integrity. Boundaries is the invisible guideline that shapes a life lived on purpose and lived authentically. Your boundaries become the blueprint so we can shape our life around what is authentic to us to reflect what we value most. So as we said before, a boundary is not a wall to keep people out, but it becomes a link. And this link begins at the edge of your inner world and extends outward with purpose and intention. It is a sacred space where your values and the world begins. It is a gentle but firm line that says, this is me. This is what I stand for. This is where I stop bending and contorting myself. This matters to me. My time matters. My energy matters. My heart, my health, and my peace, they all matter. This is my truth as a simple but undeniable fact. But the world teaches us that we have to be nice. And there's a difference between being nice and being kind. Being nice comes from a desire to please, often at the expense of ourselves. Being kind comes from a place of our own depth and authenticity. Being nice is more about social harmony and making others feel comfortable, and that may be driven from our own need for approval or even from a fear of conflict. Being nice means maybe saying yes when you actually just want to say no. Being nice may be avoiding the tough truths or a difficult conversation just to keep the peace. But being kind may not necessarily look nice to other people. Being kind is rooted in our own truth that doesn't always feel comfortable to express. Being kind is living to our values from a place of our own empathy, not from a place of fear. And being kind is first being kind to yourself with the boundaries that we've put in place as we learn the art of saying no, or not now, or not this way. So to live with boundaries needs to be lived softly but with strength, to be kind and generous but also discerning and wise. It is the understanding that the most compassionate thing that we can offer the world is our truest self, our authentic self, that is intact and that is whole. But boundaries are more than just practical tools. Boundaries become your quiet philosophy in life, a way to live with intention and purpose, almost like a discipline that keeps the soul from unraveling, that keeps our values intact. So boundaries are the unseen framework that we hook onto our authentic self, that we pin our truth onto, as a framework that allows us to flourish and to thrive in a world that never stops asking, that never stops calling, that never stops. Because without this framework, we begin to dissolve into the world around us. And without boundaries, we lose ourselves in the noise around us. We tune into the chaos, to the emotional undercurrent, as we bend and contort and pretend and shape ourselves to the expectation of what the world asks us to be. And the result of a wrongly prioritized life is a life without the inner space to move and to be expressed. A life where the self, yourself, is constantly giving, poured out, and offered to the world around us until there is nothing left within you. Not having boundaries is like a garden without fences. It's open to everything but protected by nothing. It's overrun by its environment because no one's drawn the lines that this is a space that must be honoured, nurtured, cared for, and guarded with kindness. And as introverts, we find meaning in stillness. And we need to learn this truth, that boundaries are not about shutting the world out. It is about shaping the world that we allow in. But sometimes setting boundaries can sometimes feel a little bit like rebellion, a little bit like aggression. It can start to feel a little bit mean. It definitely feels uncomfortable, almost like we've done something wrong. And therefore, we feel a sense of misplaced guilt. This is partly because as we turn away from what we were taught to believe was good or right, by the lessons we were taught that we always had to put other people first, as we learn to put ourselves second, or even worse, to put ourselves last. That in order to be worth something to other people, we have to put everybody first, before us. Where the criteria of social value becomes dependent on how nice we are, on how polite we are, how courteous we are, or maybe we have been taught never to disappoint anyone, because in order to get accepted or valued or even loved, we had to disappear a little bit. And bit by bit, again and again, the focus becomes making other people more important than us, at the expense of us, and at the expense of living out our own authentic nature. And so when we begin to say no, we begin to put quiet, gentle, but firm boundaries in place. So this becomes our unlearning, and it becomes a new turning point. Because kindness is not expressed by depleting anything of ourself. Kindness does not grow out of resentment. Kindness does not even ask you to be dishonest with yourself or those around you. Kindness begins with self-compassion and self-kindness. Knowing what our limits are. That putting ourselves first is not a crime. It is a condition of your humanity that we need to honor. That your values of compassion, of integrity, of kindness, of equality, and all the other values that you hold as your truth, all have edges. They all have to be honored by you first, filtered through you first, in order to give versions of those values to the world around you. Because if we present to everybody around us except ourselves, then those values that we hold as truth become conditions of approval and acceptance and validation, with the exchange rate and with exchange conditions of expectations from the world around us. A life without boundaries is not living within our authenticity. It is living within our obligations, dressed in politeness. So boundaries are not barriers. Boundaries show up as living authentically. It is you saying to yourself, I choose to show up, but not at the expense of myself. I choose to give, but only from a place of truth and from what I can afford. I choose to connect, not from a place of obligation, but from a place where my authenticity is aligned to what I need. Boundaries is the quiet courage that honors your rhythm, that honors your needs, and honors your internal landscape, your inner world, not to push other people away, but to stop pushing yourself beyond your limits. It's not closing yourself off. It's not a rejection of others. You are just reclaiming your space where your authenticity lives. But it's so hard to live to boundaries. It is hard to advocate for your own needs, our own space, and our own truth, because we are so used to complying to the world around us, as the world measures our worth, our output, by our obedience, as we learn to please and to appease, and to mold ourselves into shapes that we were not designed to be molded into, as we trade our own peace for approval, as we learn to fear the judgment of other people, the fear of being abandoned, the fear of being unloved, as we learn to smile when we are tired, we learn to say yes when all we want to do is rest. We learn to agree because to disagree almost feels aggressive. Living with boundaries is difficult, not because it's wrong, because it asks us to unlearn years of learning, to unlearn the scripts that we've all been given. Living with boundaries asks us to choose integrity, to choose our truth. It is going to ask us to sit with the discomfort of other people who will not approve of our boundaries. But it also will ask us to trust that those who truly see us will remain. Boundaries ask us to believe that we are still worth something, even when we say no, that we are still worthy, even when we want to rest, that we are enough, even if we do less, or speak less, or give less. Boundaries are the way that we come back to ourselves and to our voice and to our authentic nature. And every time we honor boundaries, even in the smallest ways, we start to rewrite the story. And we start to choose our truth over fear. Because perfection is not about being perfect, it's about doing the small things really well. And when we practice boundaries, slowly and gently, we are reclaiming a life that feels like our own. As we learn to say to ourselves, what do I need? What do I value? What gives me life? What is healthy and helpful for me? And just like learning a new language, this takes time to learn. This takes time to speak into the world around you and to learn how to trust your boundaries. But every boundary is a vote for the person you are becoming, because every boundary is honoring your authentic nature within you. So to live with boundaries as an introvert is to deeply understand that we need stillness, we need silence, we need quiet, because that becomes our superpower, because that's our place to recharge. It is also the understanding that deep connection is only possible, that getting our needs met is only possible, to live authentically is only possible when our own soul and our own spirit is nourished, when our own energy has not been scattered by the world around us, when we haven't been drained by obligations. It's how we learn to come home to ourselves, over and over, to create a life where our spirit, our value, our nervous system can say, this is my rhythm, this is my pace, this is my way, and that is enough for me. So always practice setting boundaries by understanding what value they are wrapping themselves around first, because that's what reflects your truth. And we do this because your own sense of self-value, as taught by the world, becomes very volatile. It's very unstable and often will fluctuate depending on the people you have around you, depending on your emotions, and it becomes impossible to use if we are using everybody around us to gauge for us what we are worth. So your authentic nature and the language that it speaks through, which is your values, is a more stable foundation. Your authentic nature is always your compass, always your sense of direction, in a world that always changes, always asks for something more, reminding you that you are not quite enough. And we all know what will happen when we live a life that is externally focused. We exhaust ourselves because we don't have the boundaries in place to look after ourselves. And when this happens, how many of us stop living to our values when our values is not the issue? It's the lack of protection and care that we place around them. And so we learn to suppress our authentic nature. We learn to suppress living out our values, often because the exchange rate of approval and acceptance is wrong. And I talked about this in the episode about values. So if you haven't heard that one, then go back and have a listen to that one. And that feeling you get, that feels unsettled, you feel out of balance, not quite in harmony. That's what happens when you're outside of your authentic nature, because the right boundaries are not put in place as we give ourselves permission to live a life outside our harmony from our authentic self. So when we learn to adjust our life to accommodate our boundaries, we learn to listen to what we need to do. We listen to that friction, to that unsettled feeling of being out of alignment, because it's that feeling that tells us where your authenticity has just ended. It's about changing the language. Instead of thinking, what are they going to think? Or, I don't want to upset them, to now starting to think, what do I need to do to not upset me and to respect myself? Because that strong feeling that we sometimes get of not wanting to upset people has been with us, sometimes for years. So don't ever think that learning to set boundaries should be easy, because you are learning to unlearn a lesson that has been your priority for most of your life. So your aim isn't to perfect boundaries. Your aim and purpose is to make boundaries easier, something you have to practice often, that you'll probably practice for the rest of your life. But you will get better and better the more you practice. And you will learn to fall back naturally in your authentic nature as you allow your authenticity to be expressed into the world around you. And you practice by stretching your proficiency skills that is just a bit further out of what is comfortable. We learn best when we step beyond our comfort zone and into this place of resistance, because in resistance is where growth lives. When challenge meets effort, when the familiar feels uncertain and the easy becomes difficult, the learning is recognized. Growth doesn't happen in our place of safety. It takes intention to consistently choose discomfort over ease. The more we practice leaning into resistance, the more natural growth becomes. And when we lean into the uncomfortability of resistance, combined with consistency, and soon we realize that what used to be uncomfortable is now more comfortable than what it was before. And have you noticed that boundaries is not about making yourself more important? It's about making yourself the priority. And it's this new priority of setting time for us to get our needs met and to live a life according to our values that we can express into the world around us, that we find boundaries then takes on a different view, because the priority is now different, because we have become the priority. It's about letting the heart race as we put in the boundary that protects our values, that we allow discomfort to be a part of the process, because discomfort is not a sign we're doing something wrong. It is often a sign we're doing something different, something we're not familiar with. And it gets easier. What once felt unbearable begins to feel a little bit more familiar. As we practice, we begin to trust that we can honor ourselves without abandoning others, that we can learn to be kind and not be consumed, that we can learn that our values is just as important as everybody else's. Because when you live to your truth, within your boundaries, within your authentic self, you find freedom. And freedom is living your way, in your pace, within your authenticity, as the person that you already are. So that's all I've got for this episode. Thank you for joining me today. And I hope that you've got something useful from this discussion. And if you have any questions you would like us to discuss on future episodes, then please email me at rethinkingmentalwellbeing@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you. So until then, go well, go in peace, have a great week, and we'll see you next time.
This Free FM podcast was brought to you with support from New Zealand On Air.